Joining us now is Paris Dennard, a Republican strategist and RNC Senior Communications Advisor for Black media. So, Paris, we've been talking to you every other week, I'd say, for the past couple of weeks as this coronavirus response has developed. And now we're at the time where states are considering reopening their economies. Do you think that now is the right time for these states to make that type of decision?
Absolutely. I think right now is the perfect time to make the decision. We are seeing states make great progress in terms of slowing the spread, flattening the curve, and observing what the president put in place with the task force in terms of the three-phase approach to open up the government. Look, in the 2 weeks that it took for Speaker Pelosi and Chuck Schumer to stop playing politics and get about the business of the people to pass the second phase of the PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, an additional 4 million people went on the unemployment rolls. That's unacceptable. And what we can see is this is unsustainable. Over 25 million people out of work cannot be sustained. And so it's now time for the governments, the local governments, to do the necessary steps, listening to science, listening to the data, doing the models, and reopening the government, their governments and their economies in phases, and relying on each individual business owner to make the wise decision on how to be a best steward of the people and their customers. Look, if we can go to the grocery store through the height of this pandemic, surely we can go and do other things and contribute to this economy.
And you mentioned all those economic numbers right there, which are devastating for, as you were saying, millions of Americans across the country. In fact, I think it's 26 million now have filed unemployment claims since the middle of March. And that's a very hard thing for the average American to go through. I sympathize with all of them. And so I do kind of understand a lot of people who are saying that maybe these lockdown orders weren't necessarily the right approach. I mean, social distancing has been the right approach, but there are people, a very small majority, I would say about 20% of the country right now, who were saying that they don't agree with lockdown orders. Do you think that the lockdown orders were effective, though?
I think there's a balance. And when you look at the totality of what the lockdown orders did, on the whole, I think they were positive. If you look at hot spots like New York and hot spots like parts of California, namely San Francisco and Oakland, you can see that those lockdown orders were effective. I think the governor of Florida, Governor DeSantis, made a good case in saying that he followed the models and did what was best for his state and showed evidence of his state versus others and how good of a job that they did. And we know that he did not immediately put down lockdown orders. If New York had not done what they did, we would not have seen the Javits Center go virtually unused, nor the USS Comfort go virtually unused for COVID-19 victims. And so I think it's a balanced approach, but I do sympathize with those Americans living in places like Michigan, where that governor is having some really draconian measures that are really going further than I think a lot of the people there are willing to accept. So I think on balance, we have to be fair and understand the plight of the Americans, because on the whole, the American people have rallied together, done the president's guidelines for slowing the spread, which is now approaching 45 days, and really done an effective job.
I think you're right. And I think a lot of people, especially in the media, want to make it an either this or that type of conversation where it's not necessarily the case. New York is very different, as you were saying, than the state of Michigan, which is very different than Florida. That's different than Nebraska. I think that, but I think that does put an emphasis on the idea, too, that this should be a state decision. This is something that maybe governors should make. And if you even want to get more specific, maybe down to the mayors and local municipalities compared to just a federal type of approach that a lot of people were calling for early on. So when we come out of this now, the emphasis is now on the economy. What should we be looking for in order to make sure that it's a smooth transition so we can climb out of this recession, if you will?
Yeah, I do believe the president was right with the task force in saying they're going to look at this on a county by county basis, because you really have to get that granular in terms of opening up economies. But at the end of the day, the things that we should be looking for are those businesses that can open up responsibly, and those businesses that are going to take personal responsibility and make necessary changes to make the customers feel safe, to make their employees feel safe. We've got to ensure that the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, is sufficient. We got to make sure it's getting to those small business owners that need it. But we also have to give them the necessary support. And it's a whole approach. It's not just the economy in terms of businesses and jobs. It's also when you look at housing and apartments and rentals and schools. We have to look at this from the standpoint of when are the schools going to open up? Because look, if you're a single mom, if you're a working parent, you can't just go back to work next week or next month if the schools are still shut down. So we have to look at it from a local approach. And the president is right. The local governments have to work collaboratively and make this work because we cannot afford to keep this government and this economy closed for much longer.
I think that's very well said because, for example, a parent needs a heads up of when they can go back to work. You can't just tell them, all right, starting tomorrow, you can start working again. The same way, as you were saying, with schools, but also different companies. They need to make sure that they get their facilities right back up so they can protect their workers in addition to just getting back to work. There's a lot of things that go into this, so I'm going to be keeping a close eye on that. But Paris Dennard, always appreciate you coming on tonight. Thank you.